Blog Talk Radio.
This is the Light of Truth radio broadcast with Michael Boldea.
All right, welcome to the program, and thank you for joining us. This is the Light of Truth radio broadcast. I am your host, Michael Boldea, and it's good to be with you again. I apologize for last week. We were going to pre-record a program. Technical glitches prevented us from doing it, but I'm sure that something was played. It was not dead air. Thank you for your patience in this regard. Last week I was away. I was traveling, or actually I was in California, the place where I grew up for, all of my teenage years and up until my early 20s. And I don't know, every time I go back, there's this sense of sadness that overwhelms me because I remember how it used to be. And right now, even the so-called good neighborhoods have turned into, well, let's just call them less than good neighborhoods. The neighborhood we grew up in, I took my little brother and his wife, because they were out there too, and we sort of toured the old, inappropriately named Malden Villas. And it's strange how when you're small, everything looks so big. Because we walked around the apartment complex, and both of us are looking at each other going, we really lived here. 7 of us actually lived in one of these little boxes. And it wasn't just the 7 of us. At one point, there was an old elderly Romanian couple that had no place to go. They couldn't afford to move anywhere. And so they too lived with us for 3 years. So basically you had 9 people in what is generously termed a 2-bedroom apartment with 1 bathroom. And we ran the ministry out of that apartment as well, a corner of the living room, which was, the size of a stamp, served as the ministry office. And it's amazing how big things seem when you're little, because there was also a little donut shop up the street from where we lived that we used to go as often as we could scrape some change together, because every child likes sweet things, and this is why I tended to be a little hefty most of my life, because, well, I like sweet things too. So we'd scrape some change together and go up to the donut shop. The lady that owned it back then still owns it now, and every time my brother and I walk in, she still remembers us. But the distance from our apartment to this place seemed so long when we were young. It seemed as though it was a trek, a journey, when in fact it was maybe a 2-minute walk at best. And it was interesting, to say the least. Just walking down memory lane, literally, I guess. Remembering our childhood, remembering all the things that our family has seen throughout the years, all the growing pains the ministry's had throughout the years, and through it all. Ever since its inception, ever since it began, ever since God birthed the vision for Hand of Help Ministries in my grandfather's heart, there is one constant, and that is God is faithful. And as long as you cling to God, as long as you don't put yourself before the will of God, as long as you cling to His promises, even when everything around you seems as though they will not come to fruition, I promise you that all things will work together for good. It's something that I've seen in my life with such regularity that I'm humbled every time I think about it. I'm humbled every time I look back on this life that I've lived. It's strange how some people forget where they came from. And once you forget where you came from, once you removed the anchor that tethered you to that memory of, this is how far I've come. You start to have this mindset of entitlement. You start to believe or assume that God owes you, or that what He has given you already is not enough. It's one of those things. Every time I go back to Romania, I always visit our ancestral home. I always go back to where I grew up the first 9 years of my life, just because I need that anchor to be firm. I need that anchor to stay in that past where you look at the progress, you look at the growth, you look at all the things that God has done from that time to this. And once you see the picture for what it is, once all the pieces come together, you can't help but be humbled. You can't help but be thankful to God. You can't help but cry out and say, Lord, you are a mighty God. You are a great and wondrous God. And I do the same thing when I go back to California. I go and I visit the old apartment complex. I walk around the neighborhood, and I remember. Because see, if the son of a millionaire is still a millionaire when he dies, there was really no forward momentum. There was really nothing there to go, wow, that's progress. But if a family can come from a third world country without speaking the language, and via providence and via the direction of God, they start a ministry and are able to build an orphanage and are able to build 50 some odd churches, and after close to 3 decades, the work still continues, and the hungry are still being fed, and the naked are still being clothed, and the orphanage is still being used to house orphans, and all our bills are paid. That's when you can say, all right, it wasn't us. It wasn't anything we did. It wasn't because we had aptitude. It wasn't because we were overly intelligent. It wasn't because we saw a niche in a market. It was because God said it would be, and God kept His word. See, a lot of us, and by us I mean people in ministry. I'm not talking about lay people. I'm talking about people in ministry, or people whom either God has called to ministry or who decided that ministry was a good fit for them. A lot of people plan their growth. A lot of people plan their progress. A lot of people have 2-year plans and 5-year plans and 10-year plans, and this is what we need to do to achieve the next benchmark. And I don't think that's healthy, because your plans and God's plans might diverge at a certain point in time. Your plans and God's plans might go in 2 separate directions. And if you are not submitted to the will of God, if the desire of your heart isn't to see the plan of God come to fruition and not your plan, then whenever God says it's time to downsize, whenever God says it's time to cut your ministry in half, whenever God says it's time to put your family in an RV and travel the nation for the next 2 years, it doesn't sit well. And we try to find excuses, and we try to find reasons as to why, well, that wasn't really the voice of God. God wasn't really that clear. Maybe it was meant for somebody else and it got sent to me by mistake. See, all these things happen when our plans and God's plans clash. But if we have no plans other than to do the will of God, if we have no plans other than to faithfully carry out that which God calls us to do, then we'll never find, or at least try to find, excuses and reasons why not to obey. We just do as we are commanded, because it's not about our ego, and it's not about our pride, and it's not about what we can build or how big we can get something. It's about whether or not we remain faithful to the calling. It's about whether or not we remain faithful to Christ. It was a productive weekend. I met a lot of people, shook a lot of hands. I preached the Word of God. Some people responded. Others were there for different reasons, and I think God reached out to those people as well. And it was good because it's hard to fathom a place like California having enough people willing to come out on a weekend and attend a prophetic conference. But there were ample people there. And that goes to show that there is hunger everywhere. Even when surrounded by what California has become, there are still people, there is still a remnant that desires more of God, that desires to understand the times that they're living in and desire direction as to what they're supposed to be doing during those times. There was also a lot of, spiritual battle, because you don't go into enemy territory without expecting pushback. You don't go into enemy territory without expecting that he lash out. So we've been living in this home for the last 2 years. We've never had any issues. We've never had any problems. Things have been going smoothly. And 2 days after I got to California, my wife couldn't come because it's hard to travel with toddlers. It's hard to travel with children and keep them in a hotel room for a weekend or 4 days. And so we talked about it, and we decided it would be, better to save a little bit of money and for her to stay back with the girls. Well, third day or second day in, my wife calls me frantically that there's a mouse in the house. Now, my wife is probably the strongest woman I've ever met, next to my mother. Those of you that got a chance to meet my mom, if you visited or if you met her in Romania or within some context, you remember that she was fiercely strong. There wasn't much that rattled my mom. She was purposeful in her desire to obey God. She was purposeful in her desire to carry out her duties to the best of her abilities. So next to my mom, my wife is the strongest woman I've ever met, followed closely or at least on even keel with my grandmother. So there's a pattern there. But she calls me frantic. Her Achilles heel, her kryptonite, the one thing that my wife cannot deal with is rodents. She can't deal with mice. She shuts down and she loses it. And it wasn't like she saw a mouse somewhere in the driveway or somewhere in the backyard. She saw a mouse in the kitchen, on the kitchen counter. And so I understood what this was, because if for 2 years there is no sign of rodents, mice, or any other critters anywhere near your home, and all of a sudden you've got one on the kitchen counter eating the girls' potato chips, you realize that it's a nefarious plan, to say the least. And it took all that I had for me not to lose my composure, not to, book a ticket back home, because I know how she reacts to these things. And it's not pretty, but she said, no, don't come home, I'll deal with it. And I asked if she wanted me to, because that's what a good husband does, but I was praying and hoping that she'd say no, because I was already there and I still needed to preach my message, and it would have been awkward. I don't think very many at the conference would have understood why Mike had to leave suddenly. And when the explanation would come forth because of a mouse, if they didn't know anybody that reacted to mice or to rodents in the way that my wife does, they really wouldn't have understood what all the hubbub was about. But my wife called an exterminator. Apparently we caught one, but there is another, because we left potato chips out again. We're tempting the mice, as it were. And they went missing again, but I'm home. And my wife is calmer than I expected her to be. And she said it wasn't easy, but The work of God never is. This is the point that I was trying to make. It doesn't matter what it is. Whenever you are doing the work of God, whenever you're out being a threat to the enemy, he will find the pressure point. And he's not going to tenderly push it. He's going to stab at it. Because the enemy knows that his time is short. The enemy knows that if he could keep the church silent and sleeping, indifferent and lukewarm for just a little while longer, then he will have won. And I know, I'm not going to get into the whole philosophical discussion. Well, Jesus wins in the end. What are you talking about? Yes, he does, but how many soldiers do we leave on the battlefield before Jesus wins in the end? That's the question. How many churches must the enemy crush? How many hearts must be shipwrecked? How many people must continue to live with false hopes and expectations of rapture any minute because it's getting bad, and they're sitting there with eyes wide open seeing it get worse and worse, and they're not going anywhere? Look, I agree. Jesus wins in the end. But that doesn't mean we're supposed to sit by and count, how much lint we pulled out of our belly button today. Because we know that Jesus wins in the end, because we know that this is a battle we will win, we fight all that much more. If we need to regroup, do it. Regroup, come back at the enemy again. Hit him where you know it hurts. Because surrender is not an option. And that's what the enemy's hoping for. The enemy is hoping that we've gotten used to comfort. He's hoping that we've gotten used to being lazy. That's the nicest way I can put it. We've gotten used to the trappings of this world. We've gotten used to living non-confrontational lives. And so even though we see that the darkness is advancing, and even though we see that things are going from bad to worse, and even though we understand that nefarious forces are making alliances that otherwise would not have occurred in order to destroy the church. Unless we understand all these things, we will not be sufficiently ready for when everything begins to fall like dominoes. The big news before I left, and I wanted to talk about this, but I didn't get a chance, was our pulling of, 50 troops out of Saudi Arabia. Well, as I was driving in, apparently Vice President Pence and Mike Pompeo, were in Turkey, I believe, and they negotiated a ceasefire between the Turks and the Saudis. I don't know how long that ceasefire is going to last, but my question is this. What would the alternative have been? What would others have liked to have done? Because now, let's just cards on the table. Not a fan of Turkey. Not a fan of Saudi Arabia. However, the Turks, unless I miss something, are part of NATO. That means that the Turks are an ally, if only on paper, to the U.S. See, the thing that bothers me is that the people that are gung-ho for war, the people that are insisting we need to do something about Turkey, bombed them out of existence, are the same people who understand that unless Donald Trump does something seriously off kilter, like go to war, he's a shoo-in for 2020. Look, I believe, and I hope I'm wrong. Honestly, I do. because it takes a lot of darkness and it takes a really cold heart to try to instigate war between the U.S. and another nation simply for political gain. But it's happened before. When Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi are encouraging war, I do not believe for 1 second they're doing it for the well-being of these United States. I do not believe for 1 second that they have the people of these United States in mind when they encourage these things. I believe it's all about politics. It's all about power. And they saw a way by which they could turn a lot of people off to this administration. Because if we started war and we sent our men and women off to die for something that's been going on for 1,000 years, and if the world tarried, I guarantee you it would be going on for 1,000 years more. Understand that this is not the first time there's been violence in that area of the world. They've been fighting and at each other's throats since the beginning. And they're not going to stop. And no matter how much we try to insist that us going to war with one side or the other is going to make the violence stop, history proves that it won't. Look, the Russians tried to strong-arm the Afghanis and finally had to give up. Look, if we get embroiled into another war in the Middle East, it's going to be a lose-lose situation for the United States. And I promise you that if we declare war on Turkey or anybody else, and I don't know how you do that. How do you declare war on a NATO ally? That's the question that nobody seems to answer for me. How do you declare war on a NATO ally? Unless we decide to, remove ourselves from NATO. So I promise you that if war is declared on Turkey, the minute that happens, every single person on the other side, including Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi, are going to be against it. How dare you? How dare you send people to die? Because these are the kinds of people that can talk out of both sides of their mouth. They can say one thing today, they can say another thing tomorrow that is completely contradictory to the thing they said yesterday. And when you call them on it, they just shrug their shoulders and, well, it was politically expedient for us at that time. They don't need to have any further explanation than that. For them, it's all about political expediency. What works for us today? What can garner us power today? And they're trying their best for there not to be any elections in 2020. This is the way that I'm seeing this play out, because they're still pushing impeachment for something that, I'm sorry, doesn't rise anywhere near the level of high crimes and misdemeanors. But with a fawning media who understands that if somehow this impeachment thing goes forward, they've got another 2 years of skyrocketing ratings and, advertisement dollars, because that's what it's all about. Understand, it's all about money and power. Power and money. They go hand in hand. And we had 3 days where there was no Russia collusion, there was no Ukrainian whatever, and ratings plummeted. These people were going out of their minds. Their ratings plummeted by 60%. Nobody was watching them. And unless you're ignorant of how this works, the more eyeballs you have on your network, the more eyeballs you have on your news, the more eyeballs you have on your program, the more money you can ask from advertisers. So if they can boast that rather than 30,000 people, 2 million people are watching them, then all they have to say to the advertisers is cough it up. Donde está el dinero, as they say in California? Because we have more market share. We have more people watching. Therefore, you're going to pay us more money to hawk your vitamins or your ShamWow. I know. The last time I saw an infomercial was for ShamWow. I haven't watched television in forever. So that's my only point of contact at this point is the ShamWow infomercials. But whatever it is that people are trying to sell other people, they have to pay more in advertising dollars if more people are watching. They realize, and rightly so, that impeachment will be a bonanza for news cycles. And so they keep having to pump it, and they keep having to encourage it, and they keep having to, what if it? What they don't understand, and what they're not taking into account, and I think it's a very dangerous thing not to take this into account, is that 60 million odd people who voted for this administration, 60 million odd people who voted for this president, don't see an impeachable offense here. And so what they're seeing is their vote being discounted. What they're seeing is the political class going, we don't care what you want. We don't care who you voted for. We have to get the big orange man out because he's a danger to the status quo. And it's on both sides of the aisle. It's not, only the Democrats are corrupt. I guarantee you, any lifers in government that are Republicans are likewise corrupt because nowadays, contrary to how it was in the 1800s, nowadays people get into politics for power and influence, which they can then parlay into big, fat, giant checks. Even when they leave politics, hey, there's a cush job, wink, wink, waiting for you on the board of Walmart, on the board of Apple, on the board of, I don't know, who else is there? Netflix? Honestly now, what possible revelatory enlightenment could Michelle and Barack Obama bring to Netflix as far as producing content goes? That they're worth $60 million. By the same token, what possible benefit could someone like Paul Ryan bring to, I don't know, Apple or Fox or whatever board he's sitting on? For what, $1 million a year or some ridiculous number? What, he was so good a speaker? It's about buying influence. It's about buying power. And they detest this current president because he's already got money. He can't be bought. He's doing what he believes to be right. And he actually cares for the American people, which isn't something I could say about many politicians nowadays. But he's not a politician. And that's another thing that they're taking into account, is that we need to make life for this man so horrible. We need to make life for this man so unbearable. We need to stab at him so often and so much that nobody in the history of this country who's just a regular old person ever even thinks about running for higher office. Because they will look back on what this man has had to go through. They'll look back on the meat grinder that has been his life for the last 3 years. And they'll just shrug their shoulders and go, what's the point? But see, nobody's taking into account that the average citizen is getting fed up with all of this. Nobody's taking into account that if they go through with impeachment, and they do attempt to oust this president without evidence for no reason, for something that does not rise to either high crimes or misdemeanors, then they will have a revolution on their hands. I'm going to let that sit for a while. I'm going to let us ponder the potential blowback and fallout. Now, I know we're talking about things like civil war and revolutions and civil unrest in this country now. But in case you're not familiar, it's not the first time that this has been discussed. In 1984, context is everything. It wasn't in 2017. It wasn't in 2016. It was in 1984 that our ministry, via my grandfather, received the revelation that said that America's judgment would begin with civil unrest, with revolution. And for the longest time, nobody could see it. Nobody, it's not happening. What do you mean, civil unrest? We may disagree, however, we can still have discourse. So much for discourse, huh? We are polarized to such an extent that the notion of agreeing to disagree is dead and buried. If you don't agree with the other side, then you shouldn't be alive. That's their stated position. You shouldn't be able to earn a living for your family. You shouldn't be able to have a job anywhere in the public or private sector. And if they had their way, you shouldn't be able to breathe oxygen either. Now, where's civil discourse? Show me a way out of this. Because I had this discussion with somebody at the meeting I was in California. They said, brother, I agree with a lot of what you said, but I don't know if we're going to get to that point of civil unrest. And I said, look at the situation now and show me a way out. Show me a peaceable way out of this. Because when God speaks prophetically, when he speaks about a nation, when he speaks about its sins, when he speaks about the environment there, when he speaks about what the culture has become, when he speaks judgment upon a nation, he speaks that judgment based on what that nation will become during the time of its judging. Does that make sense? See, we received this message in 1984 that because of homosexuality and divorce and abortion and all these things going on in the church, God would judge America. And I guarantee you there were people back then in 1984 going, well, it's bad, but it's not that bad. I mean, I understand that, God's a righteous God, but that would seem a little like jumping the gun, wouldn't it? If looking at the situation and at culture and at society in 1984, you'd go, really? We're going to get judged for this? But now fast forward to 2019. Look at the culture, look at society, look at the sin today. See, when God speaks judgment, it's not for where a nation is. He will speak judgment based on what the nation will become. And between the moment he speaks it and the fulfillment of it, there is a window of time wherein the nation can repent. There is a window of time wherein the nation can turn to Christ, can turn from its sin, can fall at the foot of the cross in humility, and cry out to God. We have not taken advantage of that opportunity. We have not taken advantage of the time that we've been given. We have not sought repentance. We have not sought righteousness. We have not sought Christ. I mean, we've sought plenty of escape chutes. We've sought plenty of fire insurance. But true repentance, can't find it even in most churches. So here we are. We are taking steps towards the fulfillment of the prophetic. That's the best way I can put it. Now, recently, as of today actually, which is October the 17th, 2019, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi actually said that the American people are not going to decide if President Trump should be impeached. It's not up to you, you silly, silly tax-paying citizen. It's not up to you, you silly, silly voter. It's up to Nancy and Adam Schiff and Jerry Nadler and a couple other people. When asked about the impeachment timeline, Pelosi said, "I keep saying to people, impeachment is about the truth and the Constitution of the United States. Maybe it's all the Botox, but I don't know how this woman can say these things with a straight face." How? This is not about the Constitution. This is not about the truth. This is about power. Because the previous president was caught on a hot mic talking to Medvedev, the then president of Russia, saying, "Hey, tell Vladimir after my election, I'll have a little more leeway." What Donald Trump said in the phone conversation with the Ukrainian president does not rise to what Obama said to Medvedev. And yet here we are. Impeach. Maxine Waters gonna impeach him. Yep, and what does she want to do? She wants to put him in solitary confinement too. That was her thing. Because, stupid always has to one-up stupid. Well, hey, impeachment isn't good enough. We should put him in solitary confinement. I'm waiting for another one to pop out of the woodwork and go, well, we should probably, bring back the thing that cuts off people's heads. What do you call that? The guillotine. We should bring back the guillotine, and we should do that. Why solitary confinement? We need to make an example so that never more average citizens aspire to political offices. You are rubes and slaves, don't you know? Why don't you know your place? Maxine Waters is your master. Adam Schiff, you're better. Jerry Nadler. He is the anointed class. How dare you? How dare you try to upturn the apple cart that they've created? And again, it's not just them. Because you know what? There's plenty of people on the Republican side taking dirty money from a lot of dirty people. Mitch McConnell's wife, her Chinese interests don't pass the smell test. But between what Mitch McConnell's wife did and what Hunter Biden did, there's no comparison. That kid went everywhere his daddy went and pretty much said, "My daddy's the vice president. Give me some money." He had no qualifications for the jobs he had other than being Joe Biden's son. Now, I understand the way the system works because I grew up there. I don't know about the Chinese and the $1.5 billion invested in Hunter Biden's company because he seemed like such a stable genius, with all the... What was it he confessed to? And if you confess to this, believe me, it's been worse. He woke up in a crack den face down in L.A. or something. So, yeah, I know how things work in a place like Ukraine because it's right next to Romania, and it's the same game with the same players. I guarantee you, if somebody was paying Hunter Biden $50,000 a month for just having an honorary title, it wasn't because he was so good at oil. It was because it was a cheap way to buy some influence. It's all about greasing palms. You got to know which palms to grease. And no, you can't go straight to the vice president, because even if he were corrupt or corruptible, it would take a lot more than $50,000 a month to, get his attention. It would take a lot more than $50,000 a month to bend him to your will just a little bit. But you know what? His son, $50,000, plenty. And we're talking about people who hold the purse strings to trillions of dollars. And it wouldn't have taken a lot for Burisma or the Ukrainians to make back their quote-unquote investment into Hunter Biden times 1,000. The U.S. government agreeing to some new drilling somewhere, in international waters, or some sort of new pipeline, or, we're going to tax this but not that. The schemes are so intricate, and the people that are engaged in the scheming are playing with so much money that they're willing to go to extremes to defend the little fiefdoms that they've built. Look, I grew up in that whole mindset. Starting in 1990, I'd have to fly back to Romania every couple months because we were building the orphanage, and we were building homes, and we were building churches. And we were the only people who refused to grease the palms of officials. And it's not that they didn't come and wink, wink, in, sort of in a roundabout way, go, where's mine? But we had to explain to them that this isn't for profit. We're not building this so we can sell it later. We're building this to house orphan children. We don't need your building permit so that after we're done building, we'll make some money on the back end and then, take care of you. We're doing this to help the people of your community, the children that are homeless, the children that are living in the streets. And for the most part, most of them understood. And thankfully, the ones that didn't understand were just underlings. And so when the same quote-unquote inspector showed up 18 times and found a problem every time that he imagined, well, then you make an appointment with his boss, and you go to his boss and go, look, I know how the system works, but I'm not going to play your game. Again, this is not for profit. Talk to your guy. Tell him, let it go. He's not getting any money. But see, and again, I've had this conversation with people before. All the people that want socialism, all the people that want communism in this country, don't understand, A, how it functions, B, what they're getting into, and C, the hell that their life will become. I grew up understanding the way the game is played. I guarantee you, I, as an individual, as a private citizen, will thrive in socialism because I know which palms need to get greased and when. Others who are all gung-ho for it are not, because they don't understand how corrupt the socialist system is. Once they have control, it's done. There's no going back. Look at Venezuela. There's people that bemoan the election of Hugo Chavez. They're the same people that were out in the streets applauding and cheering, "Oh yes, free stuff." It didn't take that long for all the wealth of the nation just to be swept away. And you know what? There's still 0.1% that are living like kings because they either know which palms to grease or they are in the system. Now, going back to Nancy Pelosi's genius explanation of how it's about the truth and the Constitution of the United States. Any other issues that you have disapproving of the way the president has dealt with Syria, whatever the subject is, reluctance, the cowardice to do something about gun violence, the cruelty of not wanting to help our dreamers and transgender people. This is where she's going. It's all constitutional, don't you know? The denial about the climate crisis that we face, the list goes on. That's about the election. That has nothing to do with what is happening in terms of our oath of office to protect and defend the Constitution and the facts that might support. And we don't know where this path will take us. Okay, let me translate for you. I used to be a translator once upon a time. So allow me to translate for you. When Nancy Pelosi says we don't know where this path will take us, what Nancy Pelosi means is we got nothing. There is nothing impeachable in this man's conduct. There's nothing impeachable in what he's done. So we're just going to keep on digging. We already have the crime. Now we have to find the evidence. Wink, wink. A reporter then asked, at what point do you say, let's just let the voters decide? Pelosi said, the voters are not going to decide whether we honor our oath of office. So there you go. Because I guarantee you, even if they go ahead with impeachment and they have a hearing, it's still not going to get wrapped up by next year's elections. They're trying to damage the man's reputation as much as humanly possible, hoping that the ill-informed go, well, yeah, he's under impeachment. But they already know what happened last time they tried to impeach a guy who was found guilty. Let's not beat around the bush. The difference between Clinton and Trump is that Bill Clinton was actually found guilty. He was disbarred. The man was shamed to no end, and yet his approval rating soared. Because you know what? At the end of the day, the tax-paying citizen of this country realizes that people are sent to Washington to represent them, not to try to amass more power for themselves, not to try to impeach a president that has committed no crimes. Now, before I go, there is one more thing that I ran across. It's a little slice of hilarity, if you will, because yeah, it's sad and cringeworthy and funny at the same time. So I don't know which way to go with it, but it proves that the apple did fall far from the tree. Because although Hillary Clinton is an astute political animal with current political aspirations, her daughter Chelsea is an idiot. That's the nicest way I can put it. Hillary and Chelsea Clinton have an awkward moment over whether a person with a beard and a penis can identify as a woman. That is the headline of the story. This is how far we've come, kids. They actually debated this. Hillary Clinton is busy hawking yet another book, this one about gutsy women, indeed. The two-time presidential loser, who may just jump into the 2020 race after all, wrote the book with daughter Chelsea. I'm sure they were both up late at night, penning away with their quills and their ink. Other than putting their name to this masterpiece of rubbish, I guarantee they even read it. But let us continue. We're short on time. Titled, The Book of Gutsy Women, Favorite Stories of Courage and Resilience, because, girl power. The book highlights the work of civil rights activist Dorothy Height, swimmer Diana Nyad, writers Rachel Carson and Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, historian Mary Beard, and of course, because they always have to be included, LGBTQWXYZZZ, trailblazer Edie Windsor and Danica Rome, the first trans woman elected to a U.S. state legislature. You get what you deserve. I'm going to stop here and just make that statement. If you don't take your rights as a citizen seriously, if you let other people make choices for you because you can't be bothered, you're going to get what you deserve. So you have Danica Rome, the first trans woman elected to a U.S. state legislature. Now, Hillary, 71, and Chelsea, 39, sat down with a British reporter over the weekend, and the differences in their worldviews were on display. In an interview with the Sunday Times, journalist Dika Etkinhead asked the pair if a person with a beard and a penis can be a woman. Ask that of any 5-year-old, and they will tell you the truth. No. Nine. Niet. No, 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 no. However, Chelsea, who got maybe 30% of her mother's intelligence, sadly, quickly answered yes. But Hillary looked uneasy, the Daily Mail reports. I'm just learning about this, Hillary said. It's a very big generational discussion because this is not something I grew up with or ever saw. Really? But I thought you're born this way and it's been since the beginning of time. It's going to take a lot more time and effort to understand what it means to be defining yourself differently. It means it's a mental disorder. It means that you should be treated. You cannot validate someone's insanity because they will only grow more insane. And eventually they look in the mirror and they see the beard and they go, oh, I'm not a woman. Then they kill themselves. Why do you think the suicide rate is through the roof? Because these people were encouraged in their insanity until they themselves realized they're insane. In her piece, Aitkenhead tells Hillary that many British feminists of Hillary's generation have a problem with the idea that, I'm not even going to go there. Anyway, Chelsea Clinton is a moron. That pretty much covers and encapsulates the story. Because if someone asks, can a person with male genitalia and a beard be a woman, and your answer is actually yes, then you don't have two neurons to rub together. I'm sorry. I will not validate insanity and call it normal. But hey, the church is okay with it. What is it? Transgender story time with Tickle Play After coming to a church near you. And you look back on the words that were given regarding what sin will have made of this nation. And you fast forward to today, and you see what's happening, and you read articles like this, where just it's mental disease is unprecedented. And all you can do is say, yep, God was right. Judgment is deserved. Because rather than seize the day and seek repentance, rather than seize the day and understand that in His goodness, God was giving us an opportunity to take a different path, we just threw out the handbrake and decided to go all in. So yes, Chelsea Clinton says that a man with a beard and male genitalia can indeed be a woman. Well, if that is true, then why can't the individual calling themselves Napoleon be Napoleon? Same mental disorder, requiring the same sort of treatment. But no. Instead, we let them come into the church sanctuaries and read to our children, because that's what progress is. That's what being loving means. I love my kids, but because I love them, sometimes I have to correct them when they do wrong. Apparently, we've redefined love too. Anyway, thank you for listening. Thank you for joining us. Lord willing, we will be back with you next week. I am almost rested, but not quite. We'll get to that eventually. Still dealing with mice. Or one really smart mouse. We'll find out. I'll keep you updated. Until then, may God bless you. May God keep you. And be on guard. The enemy is roaming about, seeking whom he may devour. Gino, if you've got anything, it's all yours.
Amen. I just want to let you all know that we have some upcoming events coming, and that will be November 2nd, Saturday, at 6:30 p.m. Our whole team will be in Shipshewana, Indiana, at Ben's Conference Center, attached to his business, Ben's Pretzels. That's at 100 East Berkshire Drive in Shipshewana, and that will be again at 6:30. Sunday, November 3rd, will be at the Northwoods Chapel in Napanee, Indiana, and it'll be a 10 o'clock in the morning meeting. And we want to just let you know that we would love to have you come, and we will post those meetings, and I believe, on our website. And then prayer request, please pray for the people that call in to Hand of Help, many that are sick, some battling cancer. I don't want to really name the names over the air, but we have, in the last couple of weeks, had quite a few prayer requests. Pray for a donor of Hand of Help whose 29-year-old son was just killed in a car accident in Michigan. And the family is very, very much going through a lot of hurt over that. Please check out our website, handofhelp.com, and also our YouTube channel, Hand of Help Warnings, where all these radio broadcasts are put on every week, our YouTube channel. God bless you. Keep us in prayer, and have a great day in the Lord.
Thank you for listening to today's broadcast, The Light of Truth with Michael Boldea. If you would like to order a copy of today's broadcast, please visit our website at handofhelp.com. If you have questions about our ministry, you can email us at handofhelpoffice@aol.com, or simply call us at 920-206-9910. God bless you.